So this session is Cayman at 100,000. It's one of the most anticipated segments of this forum. So when I put together these opening remarks, I kind of did some research myself about population growth around the world. The population of the world has now surpassed 7 billion people, and it continues to increase at a quick rate. The countries with the highest population growth rates in 2017, which is the most recent statistics, include Oman at 8.45%, Lebanon at 5.99%, Kuwait at 4.81%, Qatar at 4.72%, South Sudan at 4.09%, Niger at 4%, and Burundi at 3.34%. Based on our 2017 population statistics from the Economist and Statistics Office, Cayman's population growth at the end of 2017 was 3.3%, or 63,415 people, which placed our islands as the 8th highest in world terms of population growth per capita. Obviously, the countries on the list, the earlier ones, are far larger in terms of their land mass and population, so their growth, they have places to go. The latest population figure shows for the Cayman Islands an increase to 65,813 as of the fall of 2018. Some estimate that that figure will be much higher when the national census is completed in 2020. So when J.C. Calhoun moved to the Cayman Islands in 1979, the total population was, anybody? 16,607. That was according to the national census in 1979. He certainly has seen some changes to the islands during his time here, as we have. As the managing broker and agent for Coldwell Banker, he and his team have been on the front lines of Cayman's development transformation. JC has produced the Market Report. It is a real estate review for more than 30 years, sending it to thousands of mailboxes and posting it on the web. Besides the relevant sales statistics, there is usually a comment or two about the controversial issues of the day. His opinions are honest, an honest appraisal of the Cayman marketplace and the social trends that impact our economic sustainability. JC is a founding member of the Cayman Islands Real Estate Brokers Association, Cayman Islands Little League, and the YMCA. He will set the stage for a frank panel discussion on Cayman at 100,000. He is joined by Justin Howe, the Executive Vice President of Real Estate Development and Operations for DECCO and DART Development, Paul Byles, an economist, immediate past president and director of FTS, and Richard Howe, President and CEO of Caribbean Utilities Company Limited. Please welcome JC and the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Will and Chris and the Chamber for putting on this very important event. Certainly, it's great to have a plan for the future, and maybe if not a plan, at least a direction, especially when we're talking about things that affect every single one of us on the islands. I'm J.C. Calhoun. I've lived in the Caribbean for 47 years. Previous to coming to Cayman, I taught high school West Indian history and Caribbean geography in the Bahamas. For the last 40 years, as Will said, I've been brokering real estate here in Cayman, and the last 22 of those years, I've owned the Coldwell Banker Caribbean Master Franchise, and I've franchised 13 different countries around the Caribbean. First of all, I apologize for the market report. I'm due to have a new one out to you, but it looks like it's going to be more like July than June, I'm afraid, but certainly the direction is still the same as to what you'll read in there. Real estate is a perfect example of the actions of supply and demand. More demand than supply, prices go up. More supply than demand, prices go down. One thing I'd like to mention is there's two separate markets here in Cayman. The foreign market and the local market. And lots of times when people quote market statistics, you're not really sure where they're coming from. If they are a real estate company that deals with more expats, then that's what they're talking about, and it's not necessarily appropriate for the locals. But back in 2000, I'll just give you a quick overview of where we are right now. Back in 2015, coming out of recession, after the United States, there was a big pent-up demand to sell, people trying to translate their properties into cash. They put all their properties on the market, or many of them on the market, at lower prices than we had seen before. That caused more buying. With more buying, the supply got lower. As the supply got lower, the prices went up, and to the point where, at least in the foreign market, sales appear to be maybe slowing just a tad. The local market, very similar to the above, but we're not to the last position yet. The local market is a lot smaller than the tourist or the foreign market, and so it's much more agile, which means a lot more supply can come on the market a lot quicker, and eventually you get oversupply in that particular marketplace quicker than you do in the tourist marketplace, which is generally the developments take longer in the planning stages and the financing stages. At any rate, we're really here to talk about what's next rather than what's happened. When I started working in the real estate business, I worked for Mr. Jim Bodden, and I remember he and I had similar work ethics, I guess, because it was about 8:30 at night when he'd be getting done and I'd be getting done, and I'd go down to the Georgetown Trust building and we would talk a little bit about what I needed to get from him, and he wanted to know what was going on outside of his office. And I remember us talking about tourism because that was his favorite part of being involved in government, I think. And he used to talk about this is what we're doing, and that's what we're doing, this is what we might do. And I used to say to him, Jim, you don't have to do any of that. You don't have to spend any money on any of that stuff. And then back then, the tourism department maybe wasn't as creative as what we're seeing now, for sure. But he looked at me a little strange. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "All you have to do is keep this place safe. That's really all we have to do. If we do that, people will come, because the rest of them are just falling by the wayside." And so, really, my focus for this talk is not the real estate market necessarily. It's quality of life, because it's quality of life that brings the people here that buy the property that I'm selling for you. It's as simple as that. Now, based on all my experiences in the Caribbean, I believe that most Caribbean countries develop very similarly. And it's really where you are on that development path that matters. There's any number of phases to development. I would pick out maybe 7 here in Cayman since the 60s. But it starts off with the people who are just out there for some kind of adventure. And there's only a few of them, and they have to have very thick skins because of the mosquitoes and all of that. And it's developed through different development stages until you finally get to a mature market phase, which is where I believe we are. And that's where you start to hear people saying the phrase, "What are we doing this for?" And it's typically right in the middle of a real uptick in the economy. I remember the first time I ever heard it was when in that big fight whether or not the Ritz was going to be allowed to develop here. It was the first time I ever remember somebody getting up there saying, "What are we doing this for? Who are we doing this for?" But now I think we're hearing it a little bit more, and that's just because we're more developed than we had been. The trigger really is population to all of this. And so it's interesting that we're talking about population here at the end of the day, and that means infrastructure and development and all the other things that go with population. But I'd like to sort of concentrate a little bit on quality of life here. Population, back in 1975, about 12,000 people with about 1,000 work permit people, which meant that foreigners represented about 8% of the population here. And foreigners were very welcome here in those days. 2019, we're probably somewhere between 65 and 70,000 people with 27,000 work permits, which is somewhere around 40% of the population that would be foreigners. And in fact, I'm not sure, I doubt very much if permanent residents are included in that number, so we're probably looking at maybe 50% and I'm not really sure. I'm sure somebody out there has the statistics, but I don't know them. At any rate, in the process of increasing our population by 40%, that's 100,000, Considerable expansion will be required at a fiscal and a social cost. Then the faster it happens, the greater the cost. Post-recession, we've seen an increase of about 1.3% population, which is about 750 to 800 people a year. If you compound 1.3 annually, it'll take 28 years to get to 100,000, 2049. And the other folks on my panel are going to give you a different look at this to figure out how quickly it might actually happen. I'm just using historical numbers now. But there have been years with 6% growth per annum and 2,000 new people a year. And this was, 10 years ago or so. And who will these new people be? Will they add value to our society or be more of a drain? So it's not just the numbers of the people, it's who these people are, why they're here. I'd like to go through a couple of the areas that will be most impacted. And, the thing that bothers me about all this, or the thing that really concerns me, is that the areas which are already in the greatest need of attention after 40 years of growth are the areas that will be most impacted, most heavily affected by large population increase. For example, roads. We've just finished one of the most extensive road works in history. I mean, I can only think of the Queens Highway build that was maybe more miles, but certainly not more effort, although I don't know, that was pretty heavy-duty topography. At any rate, and we're already maxed out at peak periods and pinch points. And the figures that I've gotten from people who know far more about this than I do is that it'll cost about $200 million to service the needs of 100,000 people. $200 million. Roads are now costing $6 million a mile to build. The East-West Arterial has a price tag alone of $130 million. So, and that's if you can find the space to build the roads. No problem with the East-West Arterial, but Georgetown, West Bay Road Peninsula, Grand Harbor, forget about it. So what are the solutions to something like this? Well, the easy answer would be, well, we disperse the commercial areas in the schools and basically the traffic kind of spreads out. Well, nobody's going to go and move somewhere where their school might be built. All this stuff is going to have to happen first, which is tremendous cost. What about elevated roadways? They're talking about that in NRA. What about a mass transit system? Well, we're talking about what people used to talk about in these little Hartwell theater focus groups where everybody was looking at Disney World and seeing those trams. That's what we should do. At any rate, they're even talking about flexible school schedules, 8 to 3 and 3 to 10, 6 days a week. I can't think of anything that would be more convenient for families than to have something like that. I mean, can you imagine? Honey, what time do you have school? But I've got to go. Anyway, the only achievable solution that I can think of is probably a public bus system, which has a set schedule and stops and is reliable and covers most of Grand Cayman. And I get the benefit of having heard everybody else's comments earlier, so that I'm looking like a genius here. But I swear I had this in here before. At any rate, none of the other solutions seem very attractive, even if they were achievable or fundable, I guess. Schools. I am so happy to hear, Dan, that recent progress has been made and is being made in the Ministry of Education. This is, to me, as an ex-teacher, the key element really to quality of life. And unfortunately, our history, education-wise, hasn't been very good. I mean, the private schools, both private and public, are pretty well full now, or darn near, so there'll be a cost to expand there. Private schools, well, that sounds great, and I think that should happen, but of course they'll be more expensive as they get built, and it's tough enough as it is right now for locals to afford private school education. Public schools, well, the word dysfunctional is one that comes to my mind, and I've spoken to a lot of people in this field. In fact, a quote from a well-regarded Cayman legislator: "Why are we spending so much more per head on our children's public school education than other Caribbean countries and getting such poor results in comparison?" Anybody have any idea when that was said, maybe? 2016? 2000? 1983? 1983, Sir Basil Johnson, who knew a little bit about what you get for your dollar. At any rate, the recent studies basically say the reasons for this are poor parental support. And I get that. You know, we've been living in a nanny state around here for quite a while. And we just don't have the same parental influence on the kids that you had and that I had. And then if the nanny's not there, they're in the internet or the TV, which is even worse. Student apathy or lack of discipline. Well, it depends on which side of the desk you're on as to which one of those two you ascribe to. Hard to dismiss local bad teachers. Well, when you hire teachers just because they're Caymanians, not because they're good teachers, then we're in trouble. I mean, I saw it personally in the Bahamas, and I cannot think of a more destructive policy for any country. I mean, if there's any area where there ought to be some immigration leeway, it's in teaching our children. I mean, yes, when I was in the Bahamas, there was a teacher school. Well, that was probably the worst thing that ever happened to the Bahamas, to be honest with you. So to me, I think that is crucial to make sure the kids are properly educated. And I'm not saying here, don't have Caymanian teachers. I am saying make sure the teachers you have are the best you can get, regardless of where they're from. Overly academic curriculum is the last thing. Where are the trade schools that we've been talking about for the last 2 or 3 elections? You know, is that just an election kind of thing that you throw out there? Anyway, solutions to that: require family involvement, enforce discipline, trade school, maybe streaming. That wasn't such a bad, it didn't work out too badly in the old days. Hire better, more creative teachers. Get rid of the ones that are questionable. Maybe we ought to have headhunters out there looking for our teachers. I mean, it works very well in the rest of our industries. Why shouldn't it work for teachers? A quick segue into labor. Entry-level Caymanians are ill-prepared for their jobs today. It is a sad, sad fact of life. You almost have to know somebody in management when you go into a big company or an institution, a bank or whatever, in order to get a problem solved. Why is that? Well, it's because the people that are there just don't have the skills that they ought to have to do the job that they're being paid to do. And that's so sad. I mean, what a disservice to the company and to the customer and to the country. Never mind the clerk or the teller who is ill-prepared themselves. I mean, that's got to be the worst feeling in the world, to not be able to do the job you're supposed to be there doing. We're not doing them any favors by graduating them and put them into a job that they can't do. And it's hard to set a workable immigration and labor policy without a proper education for the labor that you're trying to place. So it's kind of a bit of a domino effect. There's lots of other things, and we've got not, a limited amount of time, but just to note a couple of them. Public beach, crowding. It's already crowded. Add another 30,000 people, where do you put them? Land prices. Add another 30,000 people, prices will only go up. And they're already getting past the point of middle-class affordability. Crime. Boy, this is the most dangerous social problem, and it's a natural byproduct of all we have mentioned above. Of course, we have to, it can cripple any country, really. I mean, I lived in the Bahamas. We all know what's happened to Jamaica over time. You know, yeah, you can police and get more security companies and all of that, but what about the inherent problem of repeat offenders? I mean, there's one particular Caymanian sitting in Northwood in a murder, for a murder, and I understand his son is in the adjacent cell, and his son has sons. So, you know, this is what we're looking at, and that's certainly not a good thing. Government expenditure. If 1/3 of the 30,000 people may end up working for government and require Synico insurance, how are we going to pay for that? Now, on the other hand, that's not to say there's not benefits from population expansion and development. Exciting new developments which increase the diversity and desirability of our tourism product? Absolutely. Increase of income into the country that can be spent on infrastructure needs and can be used to help pay for increasing government costs? Absolutely. Private institutions will be built, new hospitals, new schools to satisfy the demand. More opportunities for small and medium business entrepreneurs. More opportunities for local developers. Expansion of utility capacity. There's all kinds of good things that come with increased population and increased development. But these increases will all come with a cost, either financial or social or both. And it's up to the Caymanian people via the government to decide if the benefit is worth the cost. But a word of caution is that it's almost impossible to undo a policy when we've gone too far. Will Rogers said, letting the cat out of the bag is a whole lot easier than putting it back in. Yes, there's positive ramifications, and yes, continued development is inevitable at some pace. You can't just stop, and I'm sure Paul will be covering this. Economics doesn't work that way. But the best methods to try to regulate progress are still not clear, okay? And every place is different as far as those go. Perhaps we should stop trying to always push the envelope and spend our energy and creativity and resources on fixing the problems that we have right now. If we can do that before we put more pressure on our country, our people will be better educated, more stable, more prosperous and happier. Our populations will work better together as they did in earlier years. We might just find that our quality of life is better, find that maybe we don't need quite as much as we thought we did, and that now we have more time to enjoy what all these foreigners want to come to Cayman for. Thank you very much. I now give you Paul Byles.
Well, good afternoon. So there was a memo that said that each panelist would give a short presentation today. And I got the memo about 2 hours ago while sitting over there. So I tried to put a presentation together, but unlike Richie, who is an engineer who had his presentation planned for about 12 years, including outages, and unlike Justin, who works at DART, so has a department called Making PowerPoints on a Wednesday, I have a different story. So my story is, I was at home getting ready to come here and be on time like most of you, and you know, the right thing to do. And then I got a text message from my wife saying I should bring her laptop here because she's here. And as it is always with Lynn, with laptops, it didn't have any power, so it had like 1%, which is her MO. So I had to charge the laptop to bring it here, because I thought it'd be a good idea to do that, because today is actually our 20th anniversary. And so I thought, Paul, you know, it's anniversary, and if you can't get the laptop charged up, I mean, that's not a good way to start, right? So I stayed and I got the laptop charged, and which when I got here late, I didn't have any lunch. Woe is me, poor boy. And I sat there hungry, and I walked over to the back where the food used to be. And I saw a group of people looking at me like, who's this crazy guy looking like? Because I didn't have any pride. I was just looking, why isn't there any food here? I finally got a sandwich, and I prepared a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to deliver to you in about 5 minutes, I hope. Not like JC's promised 10 minutes that turned into 26. I started to prepare the presentation out at that door there, and I think I made a really good start because I started with a presentation that I gave to 15-year-olds recently. It's very important to understand it's basic, and it's something that I've delivered before in a different sort of environment. And it basically focuses on what I see as the key features of our economy and what I see, my personal opinion, because this is a forum for opinions, right? what I think is the dilemma that we face as a country. I'm going to have to keep looking over to see if my slide works, but let's see what happens. So I will be quick. We are a small open economy, which you know. We're predominantly service-based, which you sort of know. We have a largely transient labor force. That's a very key feature. There are not a lot of countries in the world that have that. We don't have any direct taxes, and we all enjoy that. That's very good. No corporate taxes, no property taxes, really, no personal income taxes. We have a fixed exchange rate pegged to the dollar. We operate a currency board system. And I'm now going to talk to you, hopefully 1 minute per slide, on what each of those things mean. I think that the way our economy operates in some ways define how we discuss this issue. I think it defines how we approach policy when it comes to human capital. It most certainly defines policy when it comes to immigration, when it comes to culture. And it's a balance that we have to discuss. It's not right or wrong, but it's just the mechanics of how this works that I want to discuss, and then we can have our debate about how that works. We have a small open economy, so we have small markets. A lot of the local businesses don't have a lot of consumers. They have as many as they can get, obviously, from the economy here. And what that usually means is prices are a little bit higher than normal because they have to pay rent and they have to pay staff and all so on. Whereas in some other countries, they have a huge market, access to tons of consumers, and they can sell thousands and thousands of units of things, and therefore they have economies of scale. Our small businesses often have to put the price high enough because they might only sell 3 loaves of bread today. So they got to put price up so they can pay the rent and pay staff and so on. It's a feature of a small open economy. The next point that I'll make is that we are predominantly service-based. Okay? So that means that we have competition largely in the 2 sectors that you know of, which is basically financial services and tourism. We need access to, and we heard that from the previous panel, technology and human capital, really good quality human capital for many of the services. And clearly, we also need to be ensuring that we train our Caymanians to harness these opportunities as much as possible. What does it mean? We are fueled by a largely transient labor force. That's a pretty unique thing. It means that immigration policy, can I go back? Yeah, it does, I can. Immigration policy is a key economic policy tool. This, for me, has always been one of the most important points to understand. So in some countries, like in the US, for example, we all used to hear that the Federal Reserve is raising rates or dropping rates, right? So when they do that, they do it to have an impact on the economy. So when you hear that interest rates are low, the economy is going to go ahead, right? Because people can borrow money cheaply and spend it, and the economy booms. That's the basic mechanics of that. When they believe the economy is going too fast, maybe the prices are high, too much inflation, there's too much activity, they try to slow it down by putting the interest rates up, right? And the basic mechanics is people borrow less money, so they spend less money, and the economy goes down a bit. So they control the economy. We don't have such a tool. But we do have something that does the same thing. We don't have interest rates. And Paul's opinion, is that our immigration policy works very similar to interest rate policy in other countries. And here's what I mean by that. If these 3 gentlemen want to hire 10 staff each, because there is demand for their services, and therefore, in order to fulfill that demand, they need to hire more people to service their customers. They have a choice. The first choice is, oh, I'm sorry, I can't sell you any more loaves of bread today because I don't have any staff to deal with you. Or, okay, this is a great opportunity for me as a business. I'm going to try to harness the resources that I need so I can sell you more loaves of bread. This is what happens in financial services for the past 30 years. They make the correct decision, in my opinion, to sell more loaves of bread, to grow their business. That's what commercial enterprises should be doing. They try to get the resources so they can meet the demand for their services. What is unique about our country is that the demand for our services is so great. We have global demand for our financial services and our tourism services. This demand is not fueled by myself and all of you guys here. It's fueled by the many, many thousands outside the Cayman Islands. We have little control over that aside from maybe having a good reputation and giving good service. We can get demand from Singapore, from Hong Kong, from anywhere in the world, from all over the world, from China, from the US, from Canada. And we have a basic question to answer. When someone knocks on their doors and says, we would like some more services from you, what do they do? And as I just said, I think what they should do is say, thank you very much. I'm going to have to get some more resources so I can service you. That dynamic has meant that we have brought in many, many, many foreign workers, so much that it's basically half of our work population right now. It's a unique feature because we're a tiny country with massive demand for our services. And we just have I don't want to call it a money machine, but we have this opportunity. People always want our services, right? In some other countries, it's so different. I did some work for the government many years ago when I was working on the inward investment strategy in the investment bureau. And I went to Costa Rica and I saw Ireland, I saw these places. They were creating factories to create jobs. We don't have that problem. We can create jobs easily because we have demand for our services. Whereas they were just dying to get some millions of people into jobs, right? We're very grateful that we do have unemployment, but we don't have it to that level, to that extent. It's a really nice position to be in. Immigration policy dictates whether or not we press that button. Immigration policy can be very strict, can be closed, can be harsh, whatever the words you want to use. Could be all good words. Doesn't have to be a criticism of what they do. Immigration policy can slow the economy down just by virtue of a directive saying, we think we should slow down on granting permits. That directive will slow the entire economy down because of this phenomenon I just described. The reverse. If the directive is, we should be more liberal and be kinder and nicer and grant more permits, you will see the economy go like that. Why? Because of that excessive demand for our services that we can either fulfill or not fulfill. So I think that is a very unique feature that we have, and that's what's led us to be a very multicultural society, something that we accept or we don't, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute. No direct taxes. The basic point is the government relies on import duties and certain fees to pay for everything they need to do in the country, right? They don't take a piece of your salary, literally, not directly anyway, right? Each month. They don't do that. They allow you to make whatever money you want to make, and then you pay based on your consumption of whatever services you want within the country. So when you make $100, you get $100, you take it home. It belongs to you. When you decide to buy a boat, or 2 loaves of bread, or too much beer, or whatever it is that you do with your money, you will then be hit by the consumption tax, right? That has some weaknesses as well, but this is just what we have, so I just want to describe what that means. It also means that the sources of revenue to government, as the Miller-Shaw report pointed out many years ago, they're somewhat limited. Government has to increase fees, car licenses, whatever, right? Vehicle renewals, whatever it is, to get money to pay for education and health and roads and so on. And that means we all didn't give one compromise that we all have to make. We like taking home $100 and nobody takes it from us. But we also face high prices everywhere we go in this country for everything we buy. We as a society are happy with that. Certainly I am happy with that model. Don't take my money, let me decide how much I get taxed. But it also means the cost of living is high. It's a feature of our country. Last one, which we do a fixed exchange rate system. This is similar to the point I made earlier. All it means is that the government has no other policy tool but fiscal. And I'm not pro or anti-government, but I'm going to say this. Our fiscal policy is key. Our fiscal prudence is key. I have been in situations where I've made presentations to investors, for example, with the bond many years ago, the 300 million bond. And the only thing they wanted to know was about our fiscal stability. So what we have now, in terms of the last 6 to 8 years, frankly, right, for whatever criticisms you may have, it's actually quite good to be in a position where we're complying with all of those things that the minister talked about earlier. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to the international community. It's a good thing to people who lend money. It's a good thing to credit rating agencies. It's a good thing for inward investors. So fiscal prudence is important. But we only have fiscal policy, which means government has to raise fees to raise more money, right? Or they can do another thing, which is to grow the economy, which becomes controversial. I'm going to leave it there with those 5 features. And then here comes my dilemma. And then I will sit down. So, according to me, right? So this is just my opinion now, so feel free to disagree and I'll sit down and be quiet. We are a small economy with excessive demand for labor, is how I would like to describe it. What that means is that if and whenever these 3 are ready, whenever they are ready in certain industries, they can literally press the button and grow. I happen to know this is a fact. Within financial services, if the environment is right for the recruitment of professional personnel, you will see an immediate growth in the number of professional personnel in this country. It's very simple, right? We have found a way to strike a balance now where that growth is not extraordinary. But I can promise you it's not extraordinary only for one reason, right? And that is that we have decided as a country that maybe we don't want to go at 100 miles an hour, we want to go at 65. And some people might be saying 65 is too fast. We should be less liberal and we should be going at 22% or 22 miles an hour, right? But it's just a fact. That demand is driven by global demand for services, the demand for labor. That trend is unlikely to change. No amount of retraining and education of existing Caymanians is going to 100% fix that gap. That gap is permanent. It will exist for decades to come because we're a small country with an amazing amount of demand for the services that we offer. What we can do as a country is we can better prepare Caymanians to get more and more and larger pieces of that pie, better opportunities. But we shouldn't fool ourselves. That gap is a real gap that will exist for centuries to come. Because we have something that is so unique and it's very powerful and it's so good. Small country, and everybody wants those services. A really amazing phenomenon. My question is, are we prepared to accept the consequences for the change in our society? We're already seeing changes in our society. I've heard debates that suggest that some people don't fully accept the changes in our society. We have changes to our local environment, impact on our cultural identity, because what people regard as Cayman traditionally looks different to what it looked like 40, 50 years ago, right? It's not a criticism, it's just a fact, right? Are we prepared to take the necessary changes to our infrastructure, the infrastructural needs that we have in the country, to accommodate the growth, if we want to grow? Are we prepared to adjust the balance between our environment and economic growth? I don't know. And then finally, if the answer is no, or the answer is not really or not so much, then as a country, I believe we need to decide if we are prepared for the economic consequences. I'll leave you with one story. So about 15 years ago, I went to the Sister Islands to do some work, some economic strategy work, and I met with the community, a lot of people in the town hall. And I said, what do you want for the Sister Islands? And they said, we don't want it to be like Grand Cayman. I said, okay, and that makes sense. What don't you like? We don't want to have all those buildings and all that stuff going on over there. We don't want that, right? We want to develop the Cayman Brackway, and we want to make sure that we don't have overdevelopment. We want to have character, we want to have culture, we want to have heritage, we want to have this type of community that we have here. 15 years ago, I went recently again for a similar exercise. and I was in a meeting. And we started the same meeting, and I asked the same question. There was about 32 people in the room. And one lady dared to say something similar to what was said 15 years ago. And I say it like that because the other 31 persons in the room said, wait, you're talking about you don't want to do this, and you don't want to cut down any trees, and you don't want to do that. Right now, we need some jobs. And it just shows you how that balance works, right? It's just the priorities. So now they're saying, wait a minute, no. We need some jobs, and we're willing to strike a balance and make some sacrifices because there's nothing going on here, Mr. Paul. Nothing going on here. Let's just do some stuff so we can get some jobs, right? And it just goes to show there is a balance. I don't know where the balance is. I can't say it's here or there, but it is a balancing act. And at some point, you give up a bit of something to get something else. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine too. But then there's the consequences of action as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chris and Will, for the invitation to participate in this event this afternoon. It's really fantastic, and we're grateful for it. And thank you to the Deputy Premier and the Minister of Finance and Economic Development for their attendance and their addresses earlier on. Cayman's growth over the past 50 years has been unparalleled, thanks to the visionaries in the business community, the civil service, and the government. The discussion today has been very interesting to listen to and consider in the context of Minister McTaggart's update on the state of the nation's finances and the quite incredible, fantastic news on the strength and depth of the economy, and also the panels on the future growth opportunities in tourism and population. As a global financial centre, Cayman has had an outsized impact on the world stage. Alongside financial services industry, tourism and real estate development have made Cayman a place that people want to visit, live, work, and invest. The renowned economist and urbanist Richard Florida has explained and illustrated that globalization has led to a world that is spiky rather than flat. And the spikes are where people want to be, where there are opportunities, jobs, great places, a healthy and vibrant economy, and innovation. To remain competitive, we must continue to innovate. Growth must be thoughtful, sustainable, planned, and well managed, and for the benefit of all in society. 7 Mile Beach is, of course, the jewel in the crown. Land values are now of the order of $400 per square foot. Scarcity and demand are continuing to drive up land values. With land being a scarce and finite resource of just 76 square miles in Grand Cayman, our opportunity is to go and grow up, not out. At DART, we recognise the benefits of taller buildings in certain areas of Grand Cayman, such as Georgetown and the 7 Mile Beach corridor, which are already zoned for higher density development. With Plan Cayman already underway, the time to have this conversation is now. With smaller footprint, tall buildings have a lower environmental impact, infrastructure demands are reduced, and those challenges are solvable. Building heights could, of course, simply rise slowly and incrementally, or we could follow the example of our predecessors and do something bold and visionary. An iconic tower has the potential to be more than just a building. It can become a symbol of Cayman's standing on the world stage. Its purpose would be twofold, both to signal Cayman's strength and to continue to attract visitors, including high net worth visitors, whose spending has a disproportionately positive impact on the economy and revenues to the country. A 5-star hotel and branded residence would be a central component of the iconic tower. Hotels are the economic engines of the tourism industry that drive direct and indirect economic impact and job creation to our community, and dramatically more so at the luxury end of the market. Last year, the Kimpton Seafire and the Ritz-Carlton together generated more than $14 million in direct government revenues through the tourism accommodation tax alone. The resorts employ 1,500 people directly, and as the Deputy Premier mentioned earlier, thousands more in the associated service industries, food and beverage, water sports, and transportation. As the Director of Tourism mentioned earlier, and the incredible job that Rosa and her team are doing with just the numbers they unveiled, that taken as a whole, the tourism sector is worth approaching $1 billion annually to the economy. We see our proposal for an iconic tower as a long-term investment in Cayman's future. Over the past 25 years, DART has invested more than $1.5 billion in our developments and the community. In addition to further massive investments in an iconic tower, DART would also to continue to invest in infrastructure and workforce development. At the Cayman Economic Outlook in February, the Premier shared his government's willingness to consider taller buildings. Since then, we've been working diligently to properly consider some of the matters that could move us from an idea to a plan. We've been considering scale, location, mixed-use components, market demand, infrastructure, setbacks, and the legal requirements. We've looked at other iconic buildings around the world in Dubai, London, Monaco, New York, and Singapore. We believe a building is iconic through design, not simply the height. We're considering the possibility of the tallest building in the Caribbean, a building that could be instantly recognizable the world over. We believe the logical location for the tower is at Cayman Bay. It's long been our intention to create a sea-to-sound connectivity where people can walk from 7 Mile Beach to the North Sound without crossing any major roads. And the 2 underpasses are the literal foundation of this infrastructure. As increased setbacks would and surely should be the requirement of any increased height building, we have the opportunity at Cayman Bay to locate the tower to the east of West Bay Road. Again, using Seafire as an example, you can see how increased setbacks can be used to your advantage in creating beautifully landscaped public realm spaces with a distinct identity. We're also looking at what amenities can make a building stand out. For example, the observation decks at the Eiffel Tower and the Empire State Building, Marina Bay Sands rooftop infinity pool, Oasia's vertical gardens, for the tower to become an attraction in its own right. With or without an iconic building, Cayman's population will continue to grow. Our population density is nowhere close to the likes of Dubai, Monaco, or Singapore. If growth is planned, sustainable, thoughtful, and well managed, we can learn from their successes and avoid their mistakes. If increasing building heights is inevitable, designing the skyline is our chance to innovate. We're very excited, enthusiastic, and optimistic about the future and all the opportunities. Thanks very much.
That was an engineer taking advice from an economist on how to work the clicker. So I realize I'm between you and happy hour or traffic or whatever else, so I'm going to move along fairly quickly. Just wanted to say that CUC is probably synonymous with growth, the fantastic growth that we've had over the years. We've had to stay ahead of electricity demand and facilitate the growth of the economy by providing reliable electricity service. In 1966, we started with 650 customers that we inherited from the government service, who were demanding approximately 900 kilowatts or 0.9 megawatts, which is approximately 1,500 watts or 1.5 kilowatts per customer. Today we have 30,000 customers demanding 113 megawatts of electricity, which is approximately 3,800 watts or 3.8 kilowatts per customer. So not only have our number of customers increased dramatically, but the standard of living and the amount of electricity being used has increased per customer about approximately threefold. We have approximately 240 employees today, of whom 90% are Caymanian, and that's something we're very proud of. So just being the engineer, I'll show some numbers. We often talk about this magical 100,000 population. I believe we will get there, but when is the question? These sort of projections show growth rates from the current population of about 65,000 at 2%, 3%, and 5%. So if we look at 2%, we'll get there in 2041 in approximately 21 years. At 5%, which is very aggressive, I think, we'll get there in 9 years. And at 3%, which is, I think, attainable, but probably, I would say, mid to high, in 2034, we would get to 100,000 population. That's in 15 years. Looking back to see what we've done, and this is since 2004, you can see some anomalies there with the 2004 data, obviously Hurricane Ivan. But if we take the 2005, the top line, the population from 2005 to present, that is a compound growth rate of approximately 2%. And looking at CUC's customer numbers, we've gone from approximately 20,000 to 30,000 today over the 15 years, and that's also approximately 2%. This 2% keeps coming up because if we now look at this slide, which is important to us, at the opening of the presentations, Chamber President Kirkconnell shared a presentation on the global sustainable growth and objectives, and one of those was sustainable and affordable energy. This slide shows our transition from fossil fuel with its associated emissions and price instability to cleaner renewables with more stable pricing. And in fact, it is least cost if we look forward into the next 15 years for our island system. This is all under our integrated resource plan, which was accepted by our regulator in January of this year. So if you look to the left, far left, you'll see a lot of gray there, and that shows the 160 megawatts of diesel generation capacity that we now have. There's a little bit of yellow on the top, which is the 5 megawatt utility scale solar farm in Boddentown, called the Entropy, it's owned by Entropy Cayman. And we also have at the very bottom, you'll see the little sliver there is 5 megawatts of rooftop solar. If we now look to the extreme right, in 2030, we're showing that over half of that gray band, the diesel capacity, is retired, and it's replaced largely by utility scale solar in yellow again. The rooftop solar at the bottom, which you can see has grown significantly as well. Some wind energy at the top in the light blue, and battery storage, which will be needed as the wind and solar are intermittent, and we'll need the battery storage for stability. So also related to the intermittency of the renewables is the fact that we will, if you look at the top, you can see on the right, we will require 425 megawatts of capacity, which is nearly 3 times the existing capacity to serve the load in 2030. So there is a lot of work to do. And by the way, this study was done for us. We had expert consultants come in and look at basically what the economy has done in the past and what they expect it to do in the future. And funny enough, it's showing a 2% growth in electricity demand. So that's our base case right now. If we are going to grow faster than that, the task becomes even more complicated. We can do it. We have a faster growth model as well as a slower growth model. So that's the plan. And this plan also is the least cost solution, as I mentioned before. I'll mention it again. It replaces, the diesel. Right now, we're subject to the vagaries of the world market for diesel. If we put in more renewables, it will be fixed costs. So most of the cost is upfront capital investment, and that would be, and then the running cost is fairly low. So it's much more stable pricing going forward. And also it meets, this plan meets the Paris Climate Accord greenhouse gas emission targets. So once we have the energy sources, we have to get it to consumers. The nature of renewables is that it's more distributed, so the transmission system will need to be expanded as well. We currently have a double loop system that takes electricity around the island to be distributed to customers through a distribution substation shown as the sort of blue dots there. 80% of our customers are currently west of the Boddentown substation, and currently we are increasing our capacity of the Boddentown substation, building a new 7 Mile Beach substation by the Burger King here on the 7 Mile Beach, and we're also building a new Prospect substation to run more circuits into high growth area in the Prospect, Newlands area. So that's all happening now. Getting back to the point of distributed generation, right now, the 160 megawatts that we have in capacity diesel capacity is all connected into the grid at the Green Star there at the North Sound plant. So it's very centrally located and pushed out. In the future, we anticipate that there will be more solar developments in the eastern districts. And so all of the open space like east of Boddentown, we expect that we'll see a lot of solar there, and we'll have to extend the transmission system. And we have plans for that as well. So I will close by saying that all of this, it's a lot of work to be done. It's very capital intensive. I don't remember the final number, but I think it's around present value $1.5 billion over. I think it's out to 2037 though, but it's significant capital investment. And there is a link. I'll close the loop with the Minister McTaggart's presentation that fiscal prudence of the government, good governance, and good regulations are very important when you have a capital-intensive industry as we are. So when we are trying to raise capital, a lot of those questions that Paul referred to are asked. And if you have to pay 0.5% more, when we are spending about $60 million a year, if you have to pay 0.5% more on that money, it is a significant cost. And of course, that transcends into rates and costs for consumers in the long run. And the other thing, just to close off, Paul, on your point on the BRAC, I think it reminds me of what a friend of mine once said. Actually, is he was the founder of Fortis, and he once said to me, he said, on the train to success, there are no stops. So you don't get the opportunity to step off and wait for a while and catch the next train. So sometimes, although we think growth is a curse, I would caution to say that, you can't stand still or go backwards and then expect to get back on because someone else is going to take that beautiful industry that we talked about. So I think it's more planned growth and sustainable growth, some of the things that we're all here talking about now. We just need to have good plans to move forward with some growth into the future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Had some questions from the audience, if you have any. And we're only a few minutes over, and we have a nice cocktail reception afterwards, so you can get a drink in a few minutes. But there are a couple of questions. I think I'll start it off by asking Paul a little bit about free market system. Obviously Cayman is modernizing its immigration system, and Sharon kind of outlined earlier in her presentation that it's going to be really more efficient, and we're not going to have to go hunt for those Caymanians that are somehow out there, that the immigration sends the work permit back saying there are these Caymanians out there that for these positions. So once the private sector begins to realize that the whole system of immigration is much more efficient, do you think that will trigger a natural growth spurt in our economy as our employers are able to access foreign labor at a greater way?
A short answer, I think, is yes. I mean, if the process is more efficient.
my personal view is that it's not just about efficiency. This is also about, it's about policy as well. You know, it's just about how much we are facilitating the work permit process, or how much we are, and probably more importantly, how much we are preparing young Caymanians to get those opportunities, so that, because that will also impact the need for work permits as well. So I think it's a bit of policy. It's not just efficiency. Efficiency is great in the sense that if things get processed more quickly, there will be less frustration, and that's awesome. But I think underlying all of that is a more powerful issue, which is our general approach to immigration policy. I think that's far more fundamental than the quick responses that you're referring to.
Mm-hmm. The next question is, are overseas property owners who are resident included in the population count? Does anybody know? And do we know how many overseas property owners we actually have? And what will this increased percentage be? I'm not sure if JC would have a general sense of how many overseas property. I mean, that's a difficult question, I guess, but.
No, I don't know where you'd find that kind of information, Will, to be honest. We're not separated by birth, so to speak. So I couldn't say.
And Justin, your point about the iconic tower, can you give us kind of there are some areas in central Georgetown, for example, in the commercial office spaces that really are empty right now. And there maybe in some areas at some of the commercial spaces, we need to fill in some of the blanks here and there. Just give us a sense as to what this iconic tower would include. Would it be commercial? I think you gave us a hint. You talked about an observation deck. Just kind of give us a little bit more information if you could.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Maybe what it includes first, and then we can come back to Georgetown.
Mm-hmm.
It would be principally a 5-star hotel with branded residential. There'd obviously be, so much like either the Ritz-Carlton or the Kimpton, just more vertical. There'd obviously be retail included in there. We've considered whether it had a commercial component, and some of the hotels in Miami and the Middle East as well, they do have those commercial components in them. We're not sure. Yeah, we probably think that the commercial is right to stay in the town centre at Camana Bay, and the tower stays as a vertical resort. And then going back to the first part of your question on commercial space in Georgetown, we actually see a lot of demand, quite honestly. I mean, we're obviously in that business as well as a landlord for commercial space. The take-up at just for us, selfishly, looking at the West Wind building has been really good, has been really strong of late. So the fact that a number of tenants, the bigger tenants, of course, are looking for new Grade A, Class A commercial space. Other tenants, that they're looking for something different, and that works very well for them. And the location is obviously fantastic. So I don't think we're nowhere near. We haven't started the design. We're just in a dialogue with the government at the moment. We haven't ruled it out, but I think it'd probably be the resort. Yeah. And
do you think a 2% population growth is something that is something you would think is a good decision to have a 2% population growth? Because Richard's slide kind of says that we would achieve the 100,000 population, I guess, by 2040. Yes. 41. I mean, do you think that? Because when I looked at the population growth statistics and the Economist and Statistics Office, there's lots of ups and downs. Again, we have, spikes here and there. But in order for you to have an iconic tower or some type of big structure like that, you're obviously looking at forecasted population.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's better to look at the longer term than a shorter term period. I mean, I'm sure with everybody in the room probably looked at those numbers coming into this. I think this is right. From 1950 onwards, the compound annual growth rate is something like 3.5%. And from 1970 onwards, it's a shade higher. It's something like, I believe it's 4.1 compounded. So, I don't know, maybe I'm sure the 2.2%, your numbers are obviously correct, but maybe, I don't know, maybe over time, electricity usage has become more efficient,
I would have thought actually people use more, but the numbers are just the numbers, aren't they? They're the facts. They're indisputable. Clearly, the population growth has been 4% over the last 50 years, compounded, which is quite phenomenal. The difference is obviously as the numbers get bigger, the compounding. What led to a 4% in 1970, very different to 4% today in terms of the absolute numbers of people. To come back more directly to your question, I think obviously it being a resort is for tourists and people who would then like to choose to invest. So whether that is as directly relevant to the actual population growth numbers, we're looking to bring in more high net worth, ultra high net worth, potentially even more billionaires that have a massively disproportional positive benefit to the economy. They take virtually nothing out of the economy and they put massive amounts into the economy. So we think that's what a 5+ star resort has the potential to do.
And at what stage are you at in the discussions with government? Is it in the infancy? Is it advanced stage in discussion? Or just give the audience a sense as to where you think you've reached in the discussion.
I think it's probably for the government to say rather than us. We're just the private sector. But I think it's very positive. It's a very open dialogue that we're having. And I mean, obviously it's been ongoing since the Premier's address at the Economic Outlook in February. So I think it's all very positive. But again, it's a big decision. It's a big decision. It's not, again, it's obviously not for us. It's for the government and the country.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Any other questions? Because I'm between you and the cocktail reception. So are we good? Give the panel a hand, please. Thank you very much. So in closing, I would just like to say thank you for attending. I don't know what you expected when you signed up. I hope we delivered on that expectation. We're trying to make this an annual event. We're trying to change it around a little bit. From a show of hands, did you like this format? Do you like this format? Okay, good. So excellent. That's good news. So I'd just like to thank all of our sponsors. You all know who they are. They're in your programs. And I hope you enjoy the cocktail reception, which is sponsored by DART. So please enjoy and look forward to seeing you here or some other hotel in 2020. Thank you.